after news broke that Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson would not be indicted for the shooting death of Michael Brown, protesters have been marching through the streets with their hands up, indicating their support of the scenario that Michael Brown had his hands up in surrender when he was shot. People like Megan Kelly say protesters are recreating a scenario that doesn't match grand jury testimony. Some wonder why protesters are even marching in the streets and question what they are trying to accomplish. Are protesters' demands so unclear? I guess what I don't understand what's so unclear is this is much bigger than just Michael Brown and just Eric Garner or just Trayvon Martin. I mean, there are African Americans who are wealthy, who are fearful for their kids and their sons, that any little thing, any interaction with the police could lead to death and there will be no accountability. That's what they're marching in the streets for.
Yeah, and I think in some ways it's a well-founded fear. I mean, you have a legacy of police interactions with the African American community that have been horrendous, going back to Bull Connor and the way black suspects were handed to white mobs in Reconstruction, early 1900s. Now, most of those incidents happened late 1800s, early 1900s, some as late as 1960s, 1970s. We're a long way from the 1970s. One thing I find in common about all these incidents is you have suspects resisting arrest. I think generally people who comply with police orders don't get shot. The video actually shows, I mean, the guy who was in a chokehold was resisting arrest. That doesn't justify, killing him, but I think that has to be taken into the equation. Finally, one solution I've seen proposed, which makes all kinds of sense, is officers wearing cameras. And a lot of officers support this because they feel it vindicates their version of the story.
Right. I think you sometimes will run into a police officers union that might not be 100% behind that because it's an invasion of, it's going to inhibit how they perform their duties and so forth, or maybe convey information they don't want to. And all of a sudden you've got this push-pull between what everyone kind of wants for a solution and the governing bodies behind them.
And it didn't really help with the Eric Garner case. There was video, and now the guy who shot the video, he was actually indicted on a weapons charge, and he's saying it's all retaliation from the police. They're saying they planted it on him because he took that video. So, with President Obama saying that he's funding all these cameras, you would think that's the answer, but obviously with Eric Garner, that's not the answer.
Well, the footage was cell phone footage from some guy behind a crowd with police telling him to back up. I don't think that's quite the same as footage right from the officer that's on the scene from the beginning to the end. And you mentioned Obama. I mean, I feel like the federal government, especially Obama and Holder, have really injected themselves into these issues in a non-productive way that's made it more racially divisive.
Well, I hear you on that point, but we are going to go into our next item with the whole mistrust that you were talking about.